My daughter told me not to talk to her wedding guests. Said it 15 minutes before she was supposed to walk down the aisle at St. Michael's Church. The same church where I'd mopped floors for 38 years. The same church where I'd baptized her when she was 3 weeks old. The same church where her mother and I had said our vows before God. Rebecca pulled me into the vestibule, her white dress rustling like accusation, her makeup perfect, her eyes hard. "Dad, I need you to promise me something." Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was negotiating a business deal. "Please don't talk to Troy's family. Don't talk to my guests. And please, for the love of God, don't tell anyone you work here. Work here." Like 38 years of service was something shameful. Like the calluses on my hands from scrubbing these floors were marks of disgrace instead of honest labor. I stood there in my rented tuxedo, the first tux I'd ever worn in my life, and watched my little girl, my Becca, look at me like I was a problem that needed managing. Like I was a stain she couldn't quite scrub out of her perfect picture. My throat tightened, but I nodded. What else could I do? It was her wedding day. You don't argue with a bride on her wedding day. You don't break your daughter's heart even when she's busy breaking yours. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone you'd die for, if you've ever been told to hide who you are by the person you raised to be proud, then pull up a seat right here. This story's gonna hurt before it heals. Because today we're talking about the kind of love that stays silent even when silence kills you. She squeezed my hand, but there was no warmth in it. Just relief that I'd agreed to disappear into the background of my own daughter's life. "Thank you, Daddy." That word, Daddy, felt like a knife. She only called me that when she wanted something now. Used to call me that every day back when I was her hero instead of her embarrassment. "I love you," she added. But the words were automatic, practiced, hollow as the echo in an empty church. I watched her walk away to check her makeup one more time, leaving me standing there in that vestibule where I'd hung my janitor's coat 1,000 times, where I'd started my shifts at 5 in the morning so the church would be spotless before morning mass, where I'd worked double shifts when Rebecca needed braces, when she needed a prom dress, when she needed college application fees. This building knew me better than my own daughter did anymore. And if you appreciate stories about dignity in the face of disrespect, about quiet strength when the world tells you to be ashamed, go ahead and subscribe to Grandpa's Diaries right now. I've got more truth to tell, and I'm not backing down from any of it. Father Patrick O'Brien found me there a few minutes later, still frozen in that spot. He put his hand on my shoulder, this Irish priest who'd become my closest friend over 2 decades. "You all right, Will?" His eyes saw everything. Always had. I managed a small smile, the kind you give when you're anything but all right. "Just wedding day nerves, Father." He didn't believe me. Could see right through me like I was one of his stained glass windows with light pouring through. But he just squeezed my shoulder and said, "That's my girl out there about to get married. Our girl. Raised right here in this church. Our girl." He said it with pride, with love, the way a father should be allowed to feel on his daughter's wedding day. The organ music started. Time to take my place in the front pew, in my rented tuxedo, with my instructions to stay quiet and invisible. Time to watch my daughter marry into a family that didn't know I existed beyond some vague story about property management consulting. Time to smile and nod and pretend that my heart wasn't breaking into pieces as small as the dust motes floating in the colored light from those windows I'd cleaned 10,000 times. The first time I met Troy's parents was at a restaurant I couldn't afford. One of those downtown Chicago places where the menu doesn't have prices and the waiters wear nicer suits than I owned. Rebecca had insisted on meeting there, said it was neutral territory. I understood what she meant. Not my territory, not my world. James Whitmore Sr. shook my hand with the grip of a man testing strength. His wife Margaret smiled politely, the way people smile at service workers, present but not quite seeing you. Troy was nervous, I could tell. Kept adjusting his tie, refilling water glasses, overcompensating with loud enthusiasm. "Mr. Carter, Rebecca's told us so much about you." Except she hadn't. Not really. I could see it in their eyes when they asked about my work. "I work in property maintenance," I'd said, which wasn't a lie. Just wasn't the whole truth. Rebecca had jumped in quickly, steering the conversation toward Troy's law practice, their engagement plans, anything but her father's actual life. Under the table, her foot kept tapping anxiously. Throughout that dinner, I watched my daughter perform a version of herself I didn't recognize, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny, using words like portfolio and investment strategy, like she'd been born into money instead of raised in a two-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner. The Whitmores warmed up as the evening went on, especially after their third bottle of wine. Yes, they kept track. Margaret talked about the wedding, how it simply had to be at St. Michael's because the architecture was so authentically Chicago Gothic. She had no idea I'd scrubbed every inch of that authentic Gothic architecture. Had no idea I'd replaced the kneelers in the pews, refinished the altar rail, restored the Stations of the Cross with my own hands because the parish couldn't afford professionals. "Have you been to St. Michael's, Mr. Carter?" Margaret asked, and I caught Rebecca's warning look across the table. "Once or twice," I said softly, which made Troy laugh. "Dad's being modest, I'm sure. Everyone in the neighborhood knows that church." Rebecca's smile was tight, grateful I'd played along. The check came to over $400. James insisted on paying, which was good because I'd checked my account before coming and had maybe $60 to my name until next payday. After that dinner, Rebecca's calls became even less frequent. When she did call, she talked about wedding plans, venues she'd looked at before settling on St. Michael's, flowers, photographers, everything except asking my opinion or including me in decisions. I was funding part of it, of course. She'd asked for help with the deposit, and I'd pulled money from the emergency fund I'd been building. $2,500. It hurt, but not as much as saying no would have hurt. The engagement party was at the Whitmores' Lincoln Park brownstone. 6,000 square feet of old money and new renovations. I wore my best khakis and a button-down shirt I'd bought special for the occasion. Still felt underdressed the moment I walked in. Crystal chandeliers, catered food, a jazz quartet playing in the corner, Troy's friends from law school, Rebecca's co-workers from the marketing firm, extended Whitmore family who all seemed to have hyphenated last names and summer homes. I stood in the corner nursing a ginger ale, watching Rebecca work the room like she'd been born into this world. Maybe she had been in some way I'd failed to see. Maybe I'd just been the vessel that delivered her here, to this life that had no room for a father who cleaned toilets for a living. A woman approached me, Troy's aunt, I think, and asked what I did. Before I could answer, Rebecca materialized at my elbow. "Aunt Patricia, Dad's actually thinking about retiring soon." "Aren't you, Dad?" She smiled at me, desperate, pleading. So I smiled back and nodded. Thinking about it, Patricia moved on, and Rebecca squeezed my arm. "Thank you," she whispered. Like I'd done the morning of the wedding, I arrived at St. Michael's at 4 a.m. Couldn't sleep anyway, and the church needed one final cleaning before the ceremony. Father Patrick found me polishing the brass candlesticks at 5:30, both of us knowing I was working to keep my hands busy, to keep my mind from wandering to places that hurt too much. "She asked you not to tell anyone, didn't she?" Father Patrick said, sitting in the front pew while I worked. He wasn't asking. He knew Rebecca as well as I did, had watched her grow up, watched her change. "It's her day, Father. She gets to have it the way she wants." My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. The cloth kept slipping on the brass. Father Patrick was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that shook me. "I've been praying about today, Will. Praying hard. And I keep coming back to the same scripture. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. You know what I think that means?" I stopped polishing. "I think it means sometimes the people closest to us can't see our value because they're looking for the wrong kind of worth." The wedding preparations started at noon. Florists arrived with arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Photographers set up equipment. The wedding planner, a sharp woman with a clipboard who treated the church like a venue instead of a holy place, barked orders at everyone including Father Patrick, which I could see annoyed him. Rebecca arrived at 2 for photos. She looked beautiful. Looked exactly like her mother on our wedding day, which made my chest ache. She was busy with her bridesmaids, with Troy's family, with everyone except me. I stayed in the background, straightening pews that didn't need straightening, adjusting flowers that were already perfect, just trying to feel useful, trying to feel like I belonged in my own daughter's day. That's when she found me in the vestibule, pulled me aside with urgency in her eyes. And that's when she said it. "Dad, I need you to promise me something. Please don't talk to Troy's family. Don't talk to my guests." Each word was a nail. "And please, for the love of God, don't tell anyone you work here." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger in a wedding dress. Saw someone so desperate to be accepted by a world that didn't matter that she was willing to reject the one person who'd always accepted her. But what cut deepest was the fear in her eyes. She wasn't being cruel. She was being terrified. Terrified that her new family would see her differently if they knew the truth. Terrified that love was conditional on the right background, the right story, the right father. "Okay, Becca," I said, and I watched relief flood her face. She hugged me quickly, carefully, making sure not to wrinkle her dress. "Thank you, Daddy. I love you. This just means so much to me. Everything being perfect. Perfect." I'd given her everything I had for 34 years, and it still wasn't enough to be part of her perfect day as anything more than a silent prop. The guests started arriving at 3:30. I watched from the vestibule as Troy's family filled the right side of the church. Suits that cost thousands. Jewelry that sparkled under the chandeliers. Laughter and confidence and the ease of people who'd never worried about money. My side, Rebecca's side, was smaller. Some of her friends from college. A few distant cousins. The Whitmores outnumbered us 2-1, and even that felt symbolic somehow. Father Patrick came to get me at 3:50. "Time to take your seat, Will." His voice was gentle, but there was something else in it. Something I couldn't quite read. He walked me down the aisle to the front pew, and I felt every eye on me. Felt the Whitmores wondering who this older black man in the ill-fitting tuxedo was. Felt my daughter's anxiety from wherever she was waiting to make her entrance. I sat down in that front pew, in the church I'd cared for like it was my own child, and felt more alone than I'd felt since Diane died. The organ began playing Pachelbel's Canon. Everyone stood. I stood too, turning to watch my daughter appear at the back of the church. Rebecca stood framed in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sun streaming through the entrance, looking like an angel. For a moment she was 5 years old again, coming to pick me up after my shift, her little hand in mine. Then she started walking down the aisle alone, and the memory shattered. Alone. I'd offered to walk her down the aisle, of course. Asked her 6 months ago when wedding planning started. She'd hemmed and hawed, finally said she wanted to make her own entrance, as a modern, independent woman. I'd understood the subtext. Having me escort her would require explaining who I was. Would risk someone from the Whitmore side recognizing me as the church janitor. Better to walk alone than be seen with the help. She glided past me without meeting my eyes, kept her gaze fixed on Troy at the altar, her smile perfect and practiced. I sat down heavily, feeling Father Patrick's eyes on me from where he stood waiting. The ceremony began with the usual words, the usual rituals. I'd heard them 1,000 times, performed 1,000 weddings while setting up chairs or adjusting the sound system from the back. Troy and Rebecca exchanged their vows. His voice was strong, confident. Hers wavered just slightly, nerves probably, or maybe something else. I watched my daughter promise to love and honor a man she'd known for 3 years. And all I could think was that she'd known me for 34, and couldn't even acknowledge I existed. The homily was next. Father Patrick stepped up to the microphone, and something in his expression made me sit up straighter. He wasn't looking at the bride and groom. He was looking at the congregation, at me. "Before we continue with this beautiful ceremony," he began, and my heart started racing. "I need to take a moment to talk about love, real love. The kind that doesn't ask for recognition or reward." Rebecca's eyes went wide. Troy looked confused. The Whitmores shifted in their seats, probably wondering why this priest was going off script. But Father Patrick wasn't stopping. This church has stood in this neighborhood for 112 years. In that time, thousands of families have walked through these doors. Rich and poor, black and white, proud and humble. And in all those years, I don't think anyone has served this community more selflessly than one man. My hands gripped the pew in front of me. "Father Patrick, what are you doing?" But I knew. God help me, I knew exactly what he was doing, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to stop him or let him continue. This man has worked here for 38 years. Before dawn and after dark. In summer heat and winter cold. He's not just kept this building clean, though every surface you see, every pew you're sitting in, every piece of brass and wood and stone has been cared for by his hands. He's done something far more important. Father Patrick's voice was rising, filling the sanctuary. He's created what we call the Quiet Fund. an anonymous source of help for families in crisis. Over nearly 4 decades, this fund, this man, has helped 247 families, paid rent, bought food, covered medical bills, saved homes from foreclosure, kept electricity running, all of it quiet, all of it humble, all of it asking for nothing in return. The church was silent, absolutely silent. Even the street sounds from outside seemed to have stopped. Rebecca's face had gone pale. Troy was turning to look at her, questions in his eyes. Margaret Whitmore had her hand over her mouth. The total amount of money this man has given to strangers, Father Patrick continued, his eyes locked on mine now, is $473,000, most of it from his own salary as a custodian. This man, who makes barely enough to support himself, who has worked 7 days a week for decades, who has sacrificed everything. He has saved lives. He has been the hands and feet of Christ in this community in ways most of us will never achieve. Father Patrick paused. Let the weight of those words settle on every person in that sanctuary. Then he said the words that changed everything. That man is William Carter, the father of our bride, the janitor of this church, and the greatest man I have ever known. The silence that followed Father Patrick's words was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Then someone in the back started clapping. One person, then another. Then someone else stood up, and within seconds the entire congregation was on their feet. The applause built like a wave, crashing over me where I sat frozen in that front pew. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what was happening. People were crying. I could hear them. Margaret Whitmore was sobbing openly, her hands clasped to her chest. James Whitmore Sr. was staring at me with something that looked like awe. Troy had turned completely around to look at me, his mouth open in shock. And Rebecca, my daughter, stood at the altar in her white dress, tears streaming down her face, her carefully applied makeup running in dark tracks down her cheeks. Father Patrick wasn't finished. I've kept Will's secret for 20 years because he asked me to, because he never wanted recognition, never wanted praise. But today, on this day when we're celebrating the union of 2 families, I can't in good conscience remain silent, because one of those families has tried to hide the best part of themselves. His eyes found Rebecca, and I won't let that stand in the house of God. He stepped down from the pulpit, walked directly to where I sat, and held out his hand. Will, would you stand, please? My legs didn't want to work. My whole body felt like it had forgotten how to function. But Father Patrick's hand was steady, and somehow I found myself rising, standing in front of 300 people who were still applauding, still standing, still looking at me like I was someone worth seeing. This man, Father Patrick said, his voice thick with emotion, helped pay for my sister's cancer treatment when I was a young priest with nothing but student debt. $5,000 anonymously donated through the Quiet Fund. I only found out it was him years later. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. He saved her life, Will. She's alive because of you. Has 3 grandchildren now. And you never said a word. A woman stood up in the middle section. I recognized her, Mrs. Patterson, whose husband had died 3 years ago. He paid for my husband's funeral, she said, her voice shaking. When I had nothing, when I couldn't afford to bury the man I'd loved for 40 years with any dignity, an anonymous donation covered everything, every single thing. She looked at me. It was you? Another man stood, then another woman, then families I recognized, people I'd helped over decades, all of them standing and sharing their stories. The young mother whose electricity I'd kept on during a bitter winter, the elderly couple whose medication I'd paid for, the veteran who'd been facing eviction until an anonymous check arrived. Story after story, life after life, all of them intersecting at me, at the quiet janitor who'd thought nobody noticed. Troy turned to Rebecca, and I could see him putting pieces together, understanding dawning on his face. He'd asked about her father's work, about her background, and she'd lied. Not big lies, maybe, just omissions, strategic edits, but lies nonetheless. He looked at me again, and this time when our eyes met, I saw respect, real respect, the kind you can't fake or buy or inherit. Margaret Whitmore walked up the aisle toward me, this elegant woman in her designer dress and her expensive jewelry, walking past her son, past my daughter, coming straight to where I stood. She stopped in front of me, and for a moment I thought she might slap me or scold me for disrupting her son's wedding. Instead, she took my hand in both of hers. "Mr. Carter," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. 23 years ago, my mother was dying. She lived in this neighborhood, attended this church. She was alone and scared and had no money for hospice care. Some anonymous angel, paid for everything. Paid for nurses, paid for medications, paid for her to die with dignity and without pain. Her voice broke. I've spent 2 decades wondering who that angel was, trying to find them to say thank you. Tears ran down her face. It was you, wasn't it? I remembered her mother, Mrs. Whitmore, same last name. I'd never made the connection. A kind woman who'd always had cookies for the kids after Sunday school. I'd given Father Patrick $10,000 for her care. It was most of what I'd saved that year. She was a good woman, I said softly. She deserved better than dying alone and afraid. Margaret Whitmore pulled me into a hug, right there in front of everyone. This woman who'd treated me politely but distantly at that restaurant, who'd never really seen me before this moment. She held on tight, sobbing into my shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." When Margaret Whitmore finally let me go, I looked up at the altar. Rebecca had collapsed into Troy's arms, her whole body shaking with sobs. Not delicate, wedding-appropriate tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her shoulders and made her gasp for air. Troy held her, looking over her head at me with something in his eyes I couldn't quite name. Understanding, maybe. Or grief for what his fiancée had almost thrown away. Father Patrick gestured for everyone to sit, and slowly the congregation settled back into the pews. The applause faded, the crying quieted. But the energy in that church had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't the wedding Rebecca had planned. This wasn't the perfect, polished performance where everyone played their assigned roles and nobody asked uncomfortable questions. This was something raw and real and human. "I apologize for the interruption," Father Patrick said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "But before we continue with this sacrament, this holy union of 2 people and 2 families, I needed everyone in this room to understand what family really means. It's not about hiding the parts of ourselves we think aren't good enough. It's not about pretending to be something we're not. It's about honoring the people who sacrificed everything to make us who we are." He looked at Rebecca, his voice gentle but firm. "Your father worked himself to exhaustion to give you opportunities he never had. He went without so you could have everything. He loved you so completely that he was willing to make himself invisible on your wedding day because you asked him to. That kind of love, that's what we're supposed to be celebrating today. That's what marriage is supposed to be built on. Sacrifice, humility, grace." The ceremony continued, but it was different now. When Troy and Rebecca exchanged rings, there was a weight to it that hadn't been there before. A recognition that marriage wasn't about matching tax brackets or social status. When they kissed, the applause was thunderous, but I noticed people were looking at me as much as they were looking at them. James Whitmore caught my eye and nodded. A gesture of respect from one father to another. The reception was at the Whitmore house, and this time when I arrived, I wasn't tucked in a corner. Troy's family surrounded me. Margaret introduced me to everyone as the man who saved my mother. James shook my hand and said, "I've built a successful business, Mr. Carter, but I've never done anything as important as what you've done." Young people from Troy's law firm asked about the Quiet Fund, wanted to contribute, wanted to volunteer. My daughter's wedding had turned into a referendum on what actually matters in life. Rebecca found me on the terrace around midnight. The party was winding down and I'd stepped outside to catch my breath. She stood next to me in her wedding dress, makeup finally washed off, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. For a long time, she didn't say anything, just stood there while tears rolled silently down her face. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," she finally whispered. "I'm so sorry." Her voice broke on the words. "I spent years being ashamed of the most important person in my life. I told Troy you worked in property management. I didn't invite half my childhood friends because they knew the truth. I asked you not to talk to people at my own wedding." She turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw my little girl again. The one who'd helped me clean the church. The one who'd been proud to tell people her dad took care of God's house. "How can you even look at me?" I pulled her into my arms. This daughter who'd broken my heart and was now breaking her own. Because I'm your father, I said simply. And that doesn't come with conditions. Doesn't matter if you're ashamed of me or proud of me. Doesn't matter if you understand what I did or why I did it. I'm your dad. That's not something you can lose, even when you try to give it away. We stood there on that terrace, father and daughter, while the party continued inside. After a while, Troy joined us, put his arm around his new wife, and said to me, "Sir, I'd be honored if you'd let me contribute to the Quiet Fund. And I'd like to learn more about the work you do, if you're willing to teach me." I looked at this young man, this lawyer from Lincoln Park who could have dismissed me as just a janitor, and saw something genuine, something real. Maybe Rebecca had chosen better than I'd thought. The wedding ended, people went home, life went on, but something fundamental had changed that day in St. Michael's Church. Rebecca called me the next morning and the morning after that and every morning for the next month. Really called, really talked, wanted to know about my work, about the families I'd helped, about the life she'd been too embarrassed to see. She and Troy started volunteering at the church, started their own fund to continue the work, started introducing me to their friends not as a retired consultant but as their father, the janitor, the hero. Here's what I learned on my daughter's wedding day. You can hide who you are for a while, but eventually the truth comes out. And when it does, you find out who really matters. You find out what kind of person you've become when nobody's watching. You find out if you've built your life on something real or something that crumbles the moment someone shines a light on it. My daughter tried to hide me, and in doing so, almost lost herself. But sometimes love means holding on even when someone's pushing you away. Sometimes it means staying silent until the moment you have to speak. Sometimes it means being exactly who you are and trusting that eventually, hopefully, that will be enough. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly, leave a comment below. Tell me about the time someone finally saw your worth. Tell me about the moment everything changed. And subscribe to Grandpa's Diaries because I've got more truth to tell. Some stories are about revenge, some are about vindication. This one's about redemption. About a daughter who almost lost her way and a father who loved her enough to let her find it again. We're not perfect now. We still have conversations that hurt, still working through years of distance, but we're working on it together. And sometimes, that's all any of us can ask for.